I never thought something like this could happen to me. My life had always been marked by devotion, faith, and a clear purpose to serve God. I had found peace in the convent, a routine that filled me with meaning. But everything changed the day Father Gabriel arrived at our parish. He was a young man barely over 30, with an intense gaze and a voice that could captivate anyone. His way of speaking about faith was different, more personal, more human. From the first moment I saw him, I felt something strange inside me, something I couldn't explain. It was as if his presence awakened something that had been dormant for a very long time. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just admiration, respect for someone who dedicated his life to the same purpose as I did. But with each sermon, with each casual conversation in the cloister, that admiration grew. I found myself looking for excuses to be near him, to hear his voice, to see how his eyes lit up when he talked about something he was passionate about. One day, after Mass, I offered to help organize some documents in the sacristy. We were alone, surrounded by the solemn silence of the temple. As we worked, our hands accidentally brushed against each other. And in that instant, I felt an electric current run through my body. It was a brief contact, but enough to make me aware of what was beginning to happen. "Thank you for your help, Sister Lucia," he said with a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. "It's my duty," I replied, trying to sound calm, although my heart was racing. That night, as I lay in my cell, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I hated myself for what I was feeling. How could I even consider something like this? He was a priest, a man consecrated to God, and I was a nun who had taken vows of chastity. But no matter how much I tried to pray and ask God to help me overcome these thoughts, I couldn't stop his image from invading my mind. The following days were a torment. Every time I saw him, I felt my resolve weakening. There was something in his gaze, in the way he spoke to me, that made me feel special, different. I didn't know if he felt the same way, but there were moments when his eyes seemed to seek mine in a way I couldn't ignore. One afternoon, while walking through the convent gardens, I found him sitting under a tree, reading a book. I approached him, trying to maintain my composure. "Father Gabriel?" I greeted him, and he looked up, smiling when he saw me. "Lucia, what a surprise," he said, closing the book. "You like this place as much as I do." I nodded, sitting down beside him. "It's my favorite spot. Here, I find peace when I need to reflect." "And what do you reflect on?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine curiosity. That I looked at him, feeling trapped between the truth and the need to hide my thoughts. "About my faith, about my responsibilities," I mentioned, although I knew he could sense that there was something more. "We all have our internal struggles," he said, looking toward the horizon. "Sometimes, even the most devout need to remember why we chose this path." His words resonated in my heart. Was it possible that he, too, was struggling with something that wasn't as unbreakable as it seemed? That thought filled me with hope and fear at the same time. That night, as I prayed in the chapel, I felt my faith being tested. I knew I should stay away from him, that I couldn't allow these feelings to grow. But I also knew that deep down it was already too late. Something had begun to change within me, and I wasn't sure if I could stop it. After that conversation in the garden, my life became an internal chaos. I couldn't get Gabriel out of my mind. Every time I saw him, I felt a part of me breaking. I tried to find solace in prayer, in silence, in my daily tasks, but nothing could calm the storm within me. One day, while we were organizing an activity for the community, our paths crossed again. Gabriel approached me with that serene smile that seemed to disarm me. "Sister Lucia, can you help me prepare the altar for Sunday Mass?" "Of course, Father," I replied, trying to maintain my composure as we worked. The conversation was casual at first, talking about the needs of the parish. But in a moment of silence, Gabriel stopped working and looked at me intently. "Lucia, are you all right? You seem different lately." His question caught me off guard. Had he noticed my internal struggle? I tried to smile, but I knew my voice trembled when I replied, "I'm fine, just a bit distracted." "If you need to talk, I'm here," he said, and his tone was so genuine that it almost made me cry. How could someone be so compassionate, so human, and yet so untouchable? I wanted to tell him everything, to confess what I was feeling, but fear held me back. So I just nodded and continued working, praying that he couldn't see what was really happening inside me. That night, as I lay in my cell, I heard a soft knock at the door. I never receive visitors at that hour, so I got up confused. When I opened the door, I found Gabriel standing there with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. I hesitated for a moment but finally gestured for him to enter. "What's going on, Father?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked around my small room as if searching for the right words. Finally, he said, "Lucia, I feel like something is happening between us." My heart stopped for a moment. I thought about denying it, but when our eyes met, I knew there was no way to hide it. I don't understand what you mean," I began, but the words caught in my throat. "I feel it too," he said, interrupting me. His words fell like a bomb. "I don't know when it started or how, but every time I'm near you, I feel something I shouldn't." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Everything I had repressed, everything I had tried to deny, was being confirmed by him. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and overwhelming. "This is wrong," I whispered finally, breaking the silence. "We've taken vows, Gabriel. We've dedicated our lives to God." "I know," he replied, and his voice reflected the same internal struggle I felt. "But I can't ignore it. I can't pretend it's not there." I felt tears beginning to roll down my cheeks. I wanted to scream, to tell him to leave, to never mention this again. But I didn't. Instead, I moved closer to him, seeking solace in his gaze, in his presence. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," he replied, and in his words, there was a mix of desperation and resignation. "But whatever we decide, we must do it together." Before I could respond, I felt his hand brush against mine, and the simple contact made my entire body tremble. In that moment, all the barriers we had built crumbled. It was as if the weight of our emotions was too great to contain. We looked at each other, and in his eyes I saw all the love, the guilt, and the desire that I myself felt. It was then that we crossed the line. In a moment of vulnerability, our lips met, and the world seemed to disappear. There was no fear, no guilt, no vows, only him and me, two lost souls seeking solace in each other. When we finally separated, reality hit like a blow. "This can't continue," I said, although my words lacked conviction. "I know," he replied, taking my face in his hands. "But I love you, Lucia. I don't know how it happened, but I love you." His words left me breathless. I loved him too, but admitting it meant accepting everything that came with it. It meant accepting that we had failed in our vows, in our promises. That night, as I lay alone in my cell, I knew our lives had changed forever. We had fallen into temptation, and now we had to face the consequences. The days after that night were a whirlwind of emotions. Every time I saw Gabriel, I felt a mix of love, guilt, and fear that I couldn't control. We both tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the weight of our secret followed us like a shadow, constantly reminding us of what we had done. The other nuns didn't seem to suspect anything, but I felt exposed, as if every glance, every word, could reveal what I was hiding inside. My prayers became more intense, almost desperate. I begged for forgiveness, for strength, for a way to overcome what was happening. But at the same time, I knew I couldn't deny what I felt for Gabriel. One afternoon, while I was in the chapel arranging flowers for the altar, I saw him enter. My heart raced instantly. I tried to concentrate on my task, pretending not to have noticed his presence, but he approached me slowly, stopping a few steps away. "Lucia," he said softly, his voice filled with emotion. "We need to talk." "Not now, Gabriel," I replied without looking up. "Someone might see us." "I can't go on like this," he continued, ignoring my attempt to avoid him. "I can't pretend everything is fine when it's not." Finally, I put down the flowers and looked at him. His face reflected the same internal struggle I felt. "And what do you propose?" I asked, my voice filled with frustration. "That we abandon everything? That we betray our vows definitively?" "I just want to be honest with you," he replied. "What I feel for you won't go away. I've tried to pray, to seek answers, but everything leads me back to you." His words left me breathless. I loved him, that was undeniable. But I also knew that our love was impossible. "Gabriel, this isn't just about us," I said, trying to stay calm. "We've dedicated our lives to something greater. And this goes against everything we represent." And what about what we feel? He asked, taking a step closer to me. Doesn't that matter? It matters, I whispered, feeling tears fill my eyes. But it's not enough. That night, as I tried to sleep, my mind was filled with doubts. I knew what we were doing was wrong, but I also couldn't deny the depth of my feelings. Was it possible to love someone so much and yet feel so much guilt? Could I ever forgive myself for what had happened? The next day, Gabriel and I had another conversation, this time in the garden, away from the gazes of others. We decided that the best thing to do was to keep our distance, to avoid situations that could bring us closer. It was the right thing to do, the necessary thing. But saying it was one thing and doing it was something entirely different. Every time I was near him, I felt my resolve weakening. His words, his gaze, even his presence seemed to have a power over me that I couldn't control. And he, although he tried to respect our decision, couldn't hide what he felt either. Things became even more complicated when rumors started circulating in the parish. I didn't know how it had begun, but the nuns were whispering, insinuating that something strange was happening between Gabriel and me. I tried to maintain my composure, to act as if nothing was wrong, but the fear of being discovered consumed me. One day, the Mother Superior called me to her office. Her expression was serious, and her tone inquisitive. Sister Lucia, I've noticed a certain distraction in you lately. Is there something I should be concerned about? I felt as if the ground had opened beneath my feet. No, Mother, I replied, trying to maintain my composure. Everything is fine. I hope so, she said, although her eyes reflected doubts. Remember, our duty is to serve God with purity of heart. Anything that distracts us from that purpose must be eliminated. I left her office feeling as if I couldn't breathe. I knew I was walking on thin ice, that any mistake could reveal our secret. But I also knew that even if we tried to stay away from each other, what I felt for Gabriel wouldn't disappear. That night, as I was praying in the chapel, I saw him enter. My first reaction was to stand up and leave, but something held me back. He approached me slowly, and when he was in front of me, he whispered, "I can't do it, Lucia. I can't stay away from you." Before I could respond, he took my hand, and in that instant I knew our lives were about to change forever. When Gabriel took my hand in the chapel, I felt as if everything around me disappeared. In his gaze there was desperation but also love. A love so intense that it seemed impossible to ignore. But the weight of our decisions was already beginning to crush me. "Gabriel, we can't continue like this," I whispered, my voice trembling. "This is wrong. We know it." "I know it's wrong," he replied, moving closer to me. "But I also know that what I feel for you is real. I try to fight it, but every time I try to stay away, I only think about you more." His words filled me with a mix of emotions. Fear, guilt, but also a happiness I didn't want to admit. I loved him, I knew it. But that love came with a price I wasn't sure I wanted to pay. That night, Gabriel and I crossed a line from which there was no turning back. In the solitude of the chapel, surrounded by the soft light of the candles, our souls met in a way I never thought possible. It was a moment of vulnerability, of love, but also of sin. When it was all over, I felt relieved and devastated at the same time. I had broken my vows, betrayed my faith, and although my heart was full of love for Gabriel, my conscience was shattered. The following days were hell. Every time I saw the other nuns, I felt as if they could read on my face what I had done. The Mother Superior continued to watch me closely, and the rumors in the parish only grew. Gabriel also began to change. Although he tried to act normally, I could see the guilt reflected in his eyes. One afternoon, while we were alone in the sacristy, I finally broke the silence. "Gabriel, this can't continue. We're destroying ourselves." "I know," he replied, his voice broken. "But Lucia, how can I forget you? How can I pretend that what I feel for you doesn't exist?" "I don't know," I said, feeling tears fill my eyes. "But we have to find a way. We can't keep living like this." That conversation marked a turning point. We decided that the best thing to do was to confess our sin, to face the consequences of our actions. It wasn't an easy decision, but we knew we couldn't continue living with this weight on our souls. When we went to see the Mother Superior, I felt as if my entire body was trembling. Gabriel and I held hands one last time before entering, seeking support in each other. When we confessed what had happened, the Mother Superior looked at us with a mix of disbelief and sadness. "You have committed a grave sin," she said finally, her voice firm but filled with compassion. "But you are also human. We are all fallible. What matters now is how you decide to redeem your souls." The news of our confession spread quickly. The parish was shocked, and many of the faithful demanded that Gabriel be removed from his position. I also faced rejection from my fellow nuns, who couldn't understand how I had betrayed my vows. Finally, we were given a choice. We could continue in our vocations, separated, dedicating ourselves entirely to God, or we could leave religious life and face the world together. It was a difficult decision, but deep down we both knew what our choice would be. We decided to leave the convent and the parish. Not because we didn't value them, but because we knew we couldn't continue pretending to be something we no longer were. Our love had changed our lives forever, and although the path ahead would be difficult, we were willing to face it together. The day we left the parish, I felt a mix of sadness and hope. I had lost a part of myself, but I had also gained something new, something that, although complicated, was real. Gabriel and I knew that our love wasn't perfect, that it came with scars and shadows, but it was ours. As we walked together toward an uncertain future, hand in hand, I knew that despite everything, I had found something true. And although my heart still carried the weight of guilt, it was also filled with love and a new opportunity to understand again.